What we've done so far is we've put models in, we've added textures to them, we've added lights to them, and then what we've done is we've looked at them within the Studio Max environment. Now that's great, but what we need to do is get these images out of Studio Max, and to do that we want it to make a really high quality image for us, and we call this rendering. So there's various ways of approaching rendering. If you're doing something as a still image, perhaps to print out or use it as a magazine advert, you need to do a higher quality image. If you're doing something as video, you can perhaps get away with lower quality. But we'll discuss this in the tutorials. So by the end of this tutorial, you'll be able to render a still image for print, render a still image for the web, and render an animation. Okay? Let's have a go. What I've done is I've created a fairly simple scene which you should be able to sort of create yourself. You can probably see there, what I've done is I've put in a sphere, I've put in a spotlight here. Might be a bit easy to see the spotlight from this angle. There's the spotlight. Okay, I've also put in a little omni area light down here that you could experiment with, and I've put a surface in, I put a plane in, which is just another object that was on the list of objects that we could use. So if you come over here, you had box, sphere, cylinder, and plane. And plane is just basically like a platform you can put stuff on. It's like sticking ground into a scene. And I'm going to use this as a wooden tabletop. And I've also textured these things up. Okay, so what I've got here is I've got my scene, and I've also put some keyframes in. So you can see as things move, this ball rotates, comes into the spotlight, and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, but I want to see what it actually looks like. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to come up to where it says perspective, I'm going to right click, and this menu that appears, if I come up to views and active shade, if I click on that, come down there and it'll do me a quick render of my scene. That's what it looks like. So that's what I've created. I've created a plane that I've put a wooden texture on. I've put in a sphere that I've put a checkerboard design on, and I've animated it all. Okay, so that's fine, but it's all stuck in 3D Studio Max at the moment, and I want to get it out of 3D Studio Max. Now that's fine, that gives me a quick preview of it, but it's not perfect. So I'm just going to right click and choose close, and that will get me back to how I was. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to render it out in 3 different ways. I'm going to do 2 still images, one for print, one for the web, and I'm also going to render it as an animation. And they're all fairly straightforward. If you know one, you'll know the others. So I'm going to come up to the top of my screen, and I've got an option that says rendering. So I click on rendering, first option, render. Okay, now you can see there's tons of options and what have you, and we're not going to go into all of these, and we're basically going to stay on this tab here that says common. Okay, and we're not even going to use all the options in here. What we're going to do is we're going to choose the first one. So the first thing we're going to do is render this out as a still image for printing perhaps. So I'm going to click on single, because I just want a single frame. I want this particular frame that I've got showing here now to render out, this one hidden behind the back here. Okay, and then I come down and say how big do I want this, and it's got a load of preset sizes. You can set stuff up, it's got stuff there in the menu that you could use. I'm going to make this fairly big. I'm going to make this 1280 by 960, which is about the size of a 1.3 megapixel camera. So that's going to give us a fairly good render quality. Okay, so that's going to be the number of pixels. So if you think about that, just like with a camera, the more pixels you have, the better the quality of your image, the longer it takes to render. And then I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom, and I'm going to click on save file, and I'm going to click on files down here. So these are the only 2 options we're using, and I'm going to save it to my desktop. When it wakes up, dum-de-dum-de-dum, so I think. Desktop. Just to go. Okay, and I'll call this print still. can save as. I can choose whatever format I want, so let's choose a JPEG file. Okay, some of these are picture files, some of these are video files. We'll come to these in a second. If you're doing still images, generally speaking, if you're either going to use TIFF or you're going to use JPEG. Okay, so JPEG is a slightly smaller file size, so we'll use that. And click on save. Image control, what quality do I want? I'm just going to leave those as they are. Click OK, and it should have rendered that as a still image. When I click on down here and click on render, there it goes. So I've clicked on render and it's rendered me a still image. Okay, and that's at high quality, and you can see it then scrolling down the screen as it created it. That's in a window, so I'm just going to close that down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing again, but I'm going to save it for the web. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a preset size for the web. So let's use fairly small image size. Because if you're saving it for the web, you're going to sacrifice quality for small file size. So I'll choose that size. Just choose a preset. So you can see it's a lot smaller physically than it was last time. I can come back down here to save. I can call this web still. And save it. Click on render. And you can see it's rendered at this time. It's a much smaller file size. It was much quicker. Just whizzed through it. So just different ways of rendering it and making sure you get stuff at the right size. There is a school of thought which says render everything to print quality, then reduce it down perhaps in something like Photoshop afterwards. But whichever way you want to do it, that's just two ways of rendering. Now the next one, okay, is the animation. And this is probably the one you want to play with, because once you've got an animation, you can send it to people, you can show it to the people don't need 3D Studio Max. They can play it in whichever format you render it as, so perhaps QuickTime or as an AVI file. So let's just close everything down and do that again from scratch. So I've got my viewport selected, okay, with the yellow box around it. Okay, I'm going to come to rendering, render. This time, instead of a single frame here, I'm going to choose active time segment, and that's from, see, I've got an option here. I'm going to go from frame 0 to frame 100, so that's all my frames. Okay, so it's going to render all them out. Okay, I'm going to come down. I'm going to keep it fairly small because I don't want to be waiting ages and ages for this to render. Okay, so I'll keep it at 320 by 240. Okay, and I'm going to save it again. So file save. And we'll call this ball video. Again, I'm saving it to my desktop. You can save it wherever you wanted, and this time I'm going to save it as an AVI file, okay, which is the standard video file on a PC. So click on AVI, click on save. Okay, let's have a quick think. While it's doing that, we'll come back over here. Oh, and it's asking me which codec do I want to save this in. So these are ways of compressing video down to the smaller file sizes. You'll have a different list depending what's installed on your machine. Cinepack is usually installed on most machines. Stick with that. Frame rate, again, depending what I want to use it for. If it was in the UK, I'd put it at 25 frames. Okay, click OK, and then I'm going to click on render again. So I'll come up to the bottom of my list, click on render, and you'll see it does now. It renders down to 25. Okay. Okay, and we're done. So I can close that down. So what I've got on my desktop now, you can see what I've got here at the bottom is print still. Okay, so if I click on that, that's the original print quality image that I made. Okay, let me just zoom out so you can see it. Okay, so that's there. Okay, I've got my web still. Click on that. Yeah, you can probably see it's just not quite as good quality, that one. Okay, because we made it a lot smaller. Okay, and finally the ball video, which should open in a media player. Okay, so that's the basics of rendering. So we've looked at the whole scope of stuff we can do in Studio Max, and this is the last tutorial. So if you want to carry on with Studio Max, why don't you have a look on our website and see what courses we're offering. Usually part-time courses that you can come in and attend. So hopefully I'll see you soon, and take care.